Another Tuesday went and gone by, which means we got 2 more reveals for Clan Collection, and this time it's Amon and the new Dual Knight Salome, or better known as Salami.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we've got 2 brand new reveals for the upcoming Clan Collection reveals, and Dark Regulars and Royal Paladin are now on the chopping blocks, or I don't think the term on the chopping blocks is right term here because they're actually pretty decent, or at the very least Royal Paladin is pretty spicy, and Dark Regulars does have some potential, but maybe not on first glance. So let's jump into these cards and see what the new soul charging and soul engine is going to do for Dark Regulars Amon, which also interact with your opponent's soul, but then also the new limit break superior call what right engine-ish for Dual Knight, however you want to call it, because they now can limit break on the rearguard circle. But we already knew that, but now they're going to supercharge that with even more spicy support. So let's see what these new cards can do for these new clans. And we begin with Dark Regulars. And for Dark Regulars, we start off with this new Grade 1 Amon's follower, Puginlin. And Puginlin has the effects: act on Vanguard the rearguard circle. Once a turn cost, put a card from your hand into your soul. You draw a card. Your opponent chooses a card from their hand and puts it into their soul. Your opponent may draw a card. Now, this is basically a cycle for you, but it's a very good cycle in the sense that you generate soul while doing it. Sadly, you don't draw and then put a card in soul, so it's not the most optimal cycle, but it's still solid enough. Now, the issue here is that, yes, it's free, but you give your opponent also access to the cycle up potential, and you allow them to build up soul. So any deck that uses soul to some extent can benefit from this, which can backfire against you, especially if you're up against a deck that needs grade 3 in soul, and now you give your opponent the option to put grade 3s into their soul in the early stages of the game. So it's basically a double-edged sword. Now, the interesting aspect of this card is that if you're up against a deck that goes faster through their deck, this is an option to give you some type of deck milling win condition as you make your opponent go faster through the deck even more so. And yes, they don't have to draw, but in the case they don't draw, this is actually hand destruction. So it all comes down to the situation when you use this card. This could either be an okay card that gives you cycle, but it also gives your opponent cycle. It could be a card that potentially gives you a new win condition, or it could be actual hand destruction in the late game where your opponent doesn't want to draw more cards. So yeah, pretty interesting card, but it also has another effect, which is on a rearguard circle. At the start of your battle phase, if your opponent's soul has 6 or more cards, so we're actually doing something with giving our opponents more soul, you may soul charge 1. If you soul charge, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So this is even more soul charging, and the interesting aspect is that you look at your opponent's soul to see if you can soul charge more and get 5k power. Now, in your offensive turn, this isn't an issue because you can give your opponent more soul than they actually required, and then you can meet the condition. But that also means that your opponent can play against this by using your soul on a more aggressive rate, and that then forces you to use more skills to allow them or force them to put more cards in their soul. So this does somewhat play with its first ability, that your opponent may not want to put cards in their soul because it can give you more abilities, but it all comes down to how much value that is and how much your opponent values having a card in hand or giving you that extra potential soul or 5k power or whatever extra abilities you can have, because there's more to this engine, as we're going to take a look at the new grade 2 and the new grade 3. So here we have the new grade 2, which is Amon's follower Ron Geenlin. And Ron Geenlin has the effect, although when his unit is placed on a Vanguard circle or rearguard circle, soul charge 1, your opponent chooses up to 1 card from their hand or rearguard and put it into their soul. If they did not put a card, you soul charge 1. So interesting enough, this entire skill is free, so either you get 2 soul, or you get 1 soul and you make your opponent go -1, either from hand or from the rearguard circle. Honestly, not that bad. Yes, again, you give them more soul, but that then works in tandem with the grade 1, but also with this unit's second ability, which is continuous rearguard circle and guardian circle. If your opponent's soul has 6 or more cards, this unit gets power plus 10k and shield plus 10k. So it's basically a 50k interceptor or guardian from hand or a 19k attacker, which honestly isn't actually that bad. The only problem is that, again, you need to have your opponent have 6 soul, and during your turn that might not be big of an issue, but during your opponent's turn it's a different story because they can dictate if you get the extra shield or not. Now, his first ability is interesting. Probably in most instances you're gonna get 2 soul, but actually that's not all too terrible because you can still benefit from having the excess soul because you are Dark Irregulars. You have multiple cards that can work with this or work from a bigger soul. So honestly, might not be too bad. In some instances, your opponent might decide to actually go -1 to not give you that extra soul that can help you to facilitate either a very powerful end game board state or to not make your Vanguard even more threatening than it already is. It's an interesting strategy that might have some usefulness to it, but I think to really see the value of these cards and see how actually useful it is, we have to see these cards in practice because it all comes down to what is the best play from your opponent's point of view, as that will dictate the actual value of these cards. But of course, they need to have a bomb and a win condition, or at least a card they can play towards. And that is the new Grade 3 Demon World's Marquis, Amon. And Amon has a couple of spicy abilities, which starts off with this effect. Act on Vanguard Circle once a turn, cost, put a rearguard and a card from your hand and a card from your drop into your soul. So that's almost a reverse Grade 4 Seraph Snow. Now, putting a card from your drop is actually not that bad for Dark Irregulars. Putting a rearguard is also not the end of the world. Putting a card from hand can be a bit heavy, but the payout isn't actually all too bad because it is your opponent chooses 2 cards, each from their rearguards, hand, and drop. I swear I've read that somewhere before, and put them into their soul. If your opponent did not put 6 cards into their soul, this unit gets drive +1 until the end of turn. So this gives your opponents a massive soul boost. This is honestly not that bad because they lose rearguards and they lose cards from hand while doing this. Yes, they get cards from their drop as well in the soul, which again can help your opponent if they need specific cards in the soul, but by losing rearguards and cards from hand, you can somewhat make up for it. And you can potentially get an extra drive check if your opponent doesn't have enough cards in hand, which is very unlikely. Not enough cards in drop, which is also very unlikely. It's probably if they don't have enough rearguards on the field, there you get a extra drive check. So basically, if your opponent cannot minus enough, you're going to get the extra free plus of it, which honestly isn't that terrible. And this skill will then facilitate towards your grade 1s and your grade 2s, which then will generate you even more soul and power and potentially shield. But it also will facilitate into Amon's third ability. But before we're going to get to that, let's first take a look at its second ability, which is continues to Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. During your turn, this unit gets power plus 5k for every 6 cards in your soul. If this unit's on a Vanguard Circle, it gets plus 10k instead of plus 5k. So now the extra soul charges we're going to get from the grade 1 and grade 2 will help to power up our Amons. But then also the cost of Amon's act ability will facilitate towards empowering himself. So actually the cost itself isn't necessarily a cost, as it then makes him even stronger while also ripping a lot of value from your opponent's side of the field, which honestly isn't all too terrible. And with all the extra accessible soul charge options within Dark Irregulars, this can become a very beefy boy very quickly. Now of course, big numbers doesn't mean everything. You usually want to either have guard restrict or extra crits. Spoiler alert, we can have both, because Amon has a third ability, which is continues a Vanguard Circle. This unit gets critical +1 for every 6 cards in your opponent's soul. So the first ability of Amon basically will give Amon a critical. But then if our opponent cannot put 6 cards in the soul and they had an empty soul, we can use the grade 1 and the grade 2 to potentially increase the soul count even further before the Vanguard will swing, thus having a double crit Vanguard. Now, the great thing about this whole card and this whole engine is all 3 cards cost 0 counterblast to do their entire engine, which means our opponents, for 1, cannot deny our plays, but for 2, we can run any other Counterblast Soul Charge Accelerator card like Emblem Master or the other grade 2 that can Soul Charge multiple cards, and a whole plethora of other cards that can help us filter our deck or just Soul Charge a bunch more cards. Because that will bring us to the other part that I explained earlier, because you need more than bigger numbers, you need crits and guard restrict. And that guard restrict, of course, comes in the form of Hope on Damp, which works wonderful with this engine, because this engine itself Soul Charge a bunch of cards, but then with the extra Counterblast that's available, we could Soul Charge even more cards. And with a win condition like that in Dark Regulars, this is where the potential of your opponent maybe not putting cards in their soul or not giving you extra Soul Charge can come into play, thus making your Amon cards actually more valuable, because now your opponent might minus even more, which then could play even more in the hand of Hope on Damp. So it's an interesting aspect of how these cards work together, and that it puts your opponent in a very tough situation, because they basically are between a rock and a bottom of a hard place, or what, however that saying is, how that saying works. But basically, your opponent is screwed in a lot of instances. Now, of course, this is speaking purely from a theoretical standpoint. I don't know how good these cards are in practice, and is this going to be better than Shaharot? Maybe not, or maybe it is. Honestly, don't know. The only thing that I do know is that it's very likely that Amon is going to get extra support in the following clan collection, because it probably is going to get a reverse unit. Now, will that even mean anything? We don't know, because most of the reverse units were kind of lackluster. Not all, but most. So hopefully that will mean something more for Amon, so this engine could become even more spicier than it already is. But overall, I'm loving and digging this very much so. But another thing that I'm loving very much is the new Jewel Knight support. So let's take a look at that as well. So let's first start by taking a look at the new grade 1, which is Fruiting Jewel Knight Eunice. And Eunice has the effect, auto Vanguard circle. At the end of the battle, this unit boosted cost, put a normal unit from your drop on the bottom of your deck and Soul Charge 1. You may return this unit to your hand. Overall, a pretty good skill. The whole Jewel Knight engine works or has double skills in the fact that they can put normal units to the bottom of the deck and they can Soul Charge a lot. This works really well because the whole engine is about superior calling more Jewel Knight, so the more targets you have in your deck, even better, but also uses a lot of souls, so the more soul charging we have, the better it is. And this card being able to bounce back whenever you want is nice, because it either means you can have 10k shield on demand while having the offensive value of the card as well, but it also means it's secure against any control deck if you want to remove it by the end of your turn, which is great. But you can leave it on the field for its second effect, which is Auto Vanguard Irregulars Circle. When your auto unit is placed on this unit circle, choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as that placed unit and retire it. If no units were retired, draw a card. This is basically a free +1 if you ride on the Vanguard Circle, because either you pop something, but that's very unlikely, so you're going to draw a card, which is very great. But on the Vanguard Circle, it's basically going to negate the minus of calling on top of it, because again, same scenario, either you pop something or either you draw a card, which is great. And this type of skill, where a thing will trigger if we call or ride on top of a Jewel Knight, is something that all the Jewel Knight cards have, which means we have this break ride-esque mechanic that allows us to get value even if we're going to call on top of our own units, which we most likely want to do during the battle phase. But you're going to see that more if we're going to take a look at Salome as we then see the full picture here. But before we're going to take a look at that, let's take a look at the grade 2, which is a very nice card which combos very nicely with Ashley, because we have Dogmatized Jewel Knight Sybil as the new grade 2, which has the effect Auto Vanguard Irregulars Circle. When this unit attacks, cost put a grade 2 or less card from your hand into your soul and draw a card. So this doesn't put cards back into your deck with the skill, but it gives us soul and it draws a card. So basically it's just like the Amon grade 1. It's a cycle that generates soul, which is great. The only thing is that it's more specific because you need to put a grade 2 or less into your soul, otherwise you cannot pay for the cost. But the real spice of this card comes in the form of its second effect, which is Auto Vanguard Irregulars Circle. When your auto unit is placed on this unit circle, look the free cards from the top of your deck, choose up to one grade 2 or less cards with Jewel Knight in its card name from among them, call to the rear guard circle, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So effectively, it's a free +1 if you're right on top of it, which is nice to set up your board. But that's not where I want to take this card. This card is amazing during the battle phase because this can work really nicely with Ashley. Because if you have this card on the rearguard circle, you have an Ashley on the other side. You can swing with this one, swing with the Ashley, use Ashley's skill to Soul Dash 2 and to call a new Jewel Knight to the field. Now, instead of calling it on top of Ashley, which is very typical of the combo, you can now call it on top of this grade 2, and then you can activate the skill to immediately call another card from the top of your deck onto the rested Ashley, thus actually generating 2 extra attacks out of 1 Ashley. This means that in the scenario where you had 2 Ashleys on the rearguard circle, instead of having Ashley swing into a new unit swing, Ashley swing into a new unit swing, which is 4 attacks, you now can basically do Ashley swing into this grade 2, swing, Ashley swing into a new unit on top of this unit, which calls a new unit, and then swing, swing. And it doesn't cost you anything extra to do that. It's basically an extra free call, which then will translate into an extra free multi-attack during the battle phase, which is honestly pretty great. So again, a very nice added bonus to the Jewel Knight engine, but we got even more, because the brand new main grade 3 for Jewel Knights is leading Jewel Knight Salome. And the reason why I say the brand new main Jewel Knight is because I feel like Jewel Knight Ashley is going to be your rearguard support card, but it can be a backup grade 3. But I think the ideal situation is to be on this grade 3 at all times, because her abilities are pretty damn good. Because first off, we have Auto on Vanguard Circle once a turn. At the end of battle, this unit attacked, cost counter +1. Choose any number of cards with Jewel Knights in their card name from your hand and call them to the rearguard circle with units. Then, if you called 3 or more cards and your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, cost Soul Dash 4 and stand this unit. So there are 2 things here. First off, she can call an entire board from hand. Yes, she can only call Jewel Knights, but with the latest support and already existing support, there are quite a lot of Jewel Knights to play with, and you're probably going to play all of them, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. But on top of that, she can even restand herself, so you have a double swinging Vanguard for the extra pressure that also comes with Twin Drive. Now, first off, this skill will minus you inherently if we cannot restand the Vanguard, because keep in mind, usually when you attack with the Vanguard, you go +2 of the drive checks. That's a very normal circumstances. But if we resolve the skill, we're going to call 3 units, we go -1 in total, which is actually a loss of 3 cards, because we should go +2, but at the end of it, we go -1. The trade-off is we're going to attack 2 extra times, but if we call like Ashley's from our hand, that could translate into even more attacks. So that could complicate things here a little bit. But if we can restand the Vanguard, we actually will only go -1, because we actually end up on a quote-unquote +1 here, because we drive check 2, we then reset the Vanguard and we drive check again 2, because we don't lose drive check, so that's 4 drive checks, so we go +4, but if we call those 3 units, we go +1 because we lose the 3 of those 4 cards, which still is technically a -1 of what you initially should get, because you should go +2 at the end of your Vanguard attack. But as a trade-off for that -1 is you get 2 Vanguard attacks and at least 2 extra rearguard attacks. But again, if we had Ashleys in our hands, that could equate to even more attacks, because every single Ashley is 1 extra attack. And if we use an Ashley to go into the new grade 2, that then another Ashley can come off of it, it's actually not 2 extra attacks, but 3 extra attacks. And then I would say going -1 is not that bad to equate to an extra Vanguard attack and potentially 2 to 3 extra rearguard attacks. But there's another thing to keep in mind here is, yes, this entire skill forces us to call units on top of our own units, which sound like an inherent minus, because usually when you're multi-attacking, you're gonna call onto empty rearguard circle, or you can make your rearguards disappear before calling new units. But in the Jewel Knight engine, that isn't actually minuses you're going to make. In some instances it is, but in a lot of instances it isn't, because most of our cards have specific skills that equate or activate once we call on top of each other. We have Ashley, which can give our new unit a critical if we pay the counterblast. We have the old grade 2, which gives an extra 10k to the new unit. We have the new grade 2, which can call another unit, so that can make our board even better. We have the old grade 1, which draws us a card. And we have the new grade 1, which either retires unit or also draws a card. So in a lot of cases, we either draw new cards or we get more value onto the newly called unit, which makes our multi-attack even better, because usually you want to make your extra attack stronger, which some of these cards facilitate. As well as this new Salome, because this whole engine becomes even more nuttier, and it also, the -1 is negated when we take a look at the second skill, Salome. Because Salome's second skill changes everything here, because her second skill is Auto Vanguard and Rearguard Circle. When your auto unit is placed on this unit's circle, costs Counterblast 1, and that placed unit gets power plus 10k and drive plus 1 until the end of turn. So first off, if she's a Rearguard unit, you can call on top of her with a multi-tech skill, and then a new unit for a Counterblast will gain an extra 10k power. It's worse than the grade 2, because the grade 2 just gives it 10k power for free. Now, the drive plus 1 means absolutely nothing for a Rearguard unit because they don't do drive checks. That's a different story if we can ride Salome on top of Salome, because that means that the Salome that we just rode swings for 23 or maybe more and triple drive. Which then means we have a triple drive Vanguard that restands and doesn't lose drive checks. So she swings with a triple drive, and then she restands and swings again for triple drive. So that's +6. And then we can go -3 or -4 if we want to call more units. But let's say we're going to go -3. Then we still go +3, which is a +1 on a normal twin driving Vanguard attack. So we go +1 in general, while swinging twice with the Vanguard, while generating more multi-attacks with the Rearguards, which at least equates to 2 extra Rearguard swings, but depending on what we call, that could mean more Rearguard swings. For 2 Counterblasts and 4 soul, potentially 6 to 8 soul. 2 Counterblasts going +1 and multi-attacking a lot is really good. The soul might sound bad, but as we've seen with a lot of these Jewel Knight engines, a lot of the cards generate soul, but on top of that, they also shuffle back cards into the deck. So deck out shouldn't be too much of an issue, because we can almost send as many cards back as the cards that we soul charge. So at the end of the story, we still equate to having the same deck size. The only cards that we're going to lose are the cards that we draw and drive checking, which are still a lot, but not a lot that deck out should be your most or your biggest concern here. Overall, these Jewel Knights cards are looking very spicy and very good, with a lot of combo potential. And the crazy part about this is that it's highly likely that they're going to get even more support coming later this year, because I assume that they're going to get Ashley Reverse in the second half of 2022. So that means even more Jewel Knight support. So I am very curious of what the next wave of Jewel Knights are going to do, because the V Premium version of the deck is looking mighty spicy. But Premium is on a whole nother level, because in Premium they even have a lot more Jewel Knights to play with. But more importantly, they have the Crystal Luster Stride, which in itself is already a triple drive Vanguard unit that can copy your skills. So we already have the triple drive inherently built. It's a 28k body, and it has potentially the annoying guard restrict on all your attacks. Yeah, that could be a thing. So overall, these new support for Jewel Knights are looking very tasty, and I cannot wait to actually see them in action, and I think they're going to be very, very powerful. So yeah, 2022 is looking very interesting so far. But that said, that's all about that we got today. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards. I personally am very excited about these reveals. Amon looks very interesting. Salome and the new Jewel Knights are looking very powerful. But what are your thoughts about these cards? Do you like a specific card around these support cards? Or are you very excited about one of these boss units? Or are you excited about the prospect of the future support? Because both these archetypes are very likely to get even more support with the upcoming counterpart of their reverse units, either reverse Amon or reverse Ashley's. It's very likely that we're going to see even more support, so let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/FranklinInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/FranklinInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!